The networking opportunities here at CppCon are well above and beyond any other C++ conference that I've ever been to.
Just closing the door. Hello, everyone. Hello. So this year I got a little bit reflexive. There I am, right there. I am Nevin Liber, right? This is my picture from the first BoothCon with the only chef's hat in existence for CppCon. We can talk later. So I am the proud father of twin boys who, despite my trying to get them hooked on C++ from the moment they were born, refused to follow in my footsteps. Right? I'm a classic rock fan. Like the week before this, like with kind of poor planning, I saw like both The Who and Ringo Starr. Like Ringo can jump like a foot in the air still, like a couple of times. At 85, I hope I can't do it now, but. But more important, I am also the co-chair of the Library Evolution Working Group Incubator. I'm the ISO WG21 C++ International Committee, and I'm also the vice chair of the US delegation to that committee. And this is going to be my story, right? I found, like, I talk to people a lot. I'm a people person. I talk to people, and I find out, like, they all believe, a lot of them believe they can never be on the standards committee, right? They're not good enough. They're not smart enough. They're not expert enough. And it bugs me because whenever I hear any of that, like, I want to change their minds. I want to change your minds because some of you are on the committee, but not all of you. And I think the best way to do that is for me to tell my story. So let's go all the way back to, when I was first getting started. I was working at AT&T Bell Labs in Indian Hill facility. That's the telephony division. That's in Illinois. And I kind of like backed into C++. One day, a good friend of mine from Apple gives me a call and says, "Hey, Nevin, what do you know about C++? You guys at Bell Labs invented it." I knew nothing about C++ at that point. But that was enough of a spark like to get me, I need to find out more. So I start asking around. And I find there's an engineer in another building. I'd never met him. I hopped in my car. It was like a brand new Mazda, first stick shift car ever. Drive over there, knock on his door. And that person is Jim Cope. Right? He would, for instance, later on coin the term curiously recurring template pattern, CRTP. Not the earliest days, but kind of the middle days, right? He was great, and he was very enthusiastic person. Like he was very happy. Like I wanted to play with C++. So he had a C-front compiler on a tape. He loaded it up on one of the Bell Labs systems locally so I could play with it. And he said, ask me anything. So for weeks, I would like send him email questions about the language. And like with C-front, it helped me figure out the object model because I could see the C code being generated. And I also learned a lot more about C than I thought I was going to know too, because things you could do. And I don't remember any of the questions I asked him. However, I do remember the question he could not answer. And it was this. I couldn't understand why the I was still in scope, was still existing. It didn't make sense to me. It really made sense, right? The scope should be until the curly. Cope didn't know the answer either. So, like, who can we ask? There's only really one person. The person back there. There we go. Right, Bjarne Strostrup. And like, I don't know him. I've never met him. Like, he's, many states away from where I am. And so I am sweating for 2 days, right, agonizing over this email and writing and rewriting that I'm going to send him, right? And, very deferential, but I have to answer, my question, right? I don't understand this, why it's like this. I think this should be out of scope. And like the end of the second day, I send off my email and I go home, right? I don't want to think about this. Next day, email is waiting for me from Bjarne. It's very polite, very, very friendly. And like, he goes like, yes, I understand. Like this is a mistake. The scope really should go, but I have users and I can't break backwards compatibility. And to me, like, that's really the first lesson. And it made a lot of sense. And there were only 200 times I even remotely interacted with Bjarne while I was at Bell Labs. The first was I would have Bell Labs buy me the books from like all the like Kernahan, Ritchie, Bjarne. I would throw them in company mail with a little note and say, could you please autograph this? And then they would send it back. So I have a nice collection. And the other time is Bjarne came to Indian Hill, our facility, to talk about like using C++ instead of C. And I remember from that talk, he had said like they recompiled the 5ESS telephone switch code, which at the time was one of the largest software projects in the world, about 50 million lines of code. And because C++ had function prototypes and C didn't at the time, found 3 bugs. And I got to meet him, right? I got to shake his hand that day. Were those bug fixed? I hope my colleagues did it. I don't really know it because that was coincidentally was going to be my last day at Bell Labs. Right? Because I was leaving to go work at Apple. And by the way, before they actually published the 98 standard, this did get fixed. So this would be a great story if like I just became like this huge fanboy for C++ and an addict at this point, but really that wasn't where my passion was at that moment. I was more, and it wouldn't be for another decade. I was more curious about different programming languages. I worked at Apple. I eventually went to grad school at the University of Arizona, and I went there because Ralph Griswold, the inventor of Snowball and Icon, was there, and I wanted to learn from him. I had tried Java like while I was doing this stuff. I even tried a language called Mumps. It's in a lot of ways a very terrible language. I'm very glad to leave it behind. And so while I'm a TA, right, we have a comparative programming languages class, and there's someone can't compile this piece of C++ code. And I'm looking at it, and it's like, looks okay. I don't get it. I don't remember. I think I'd forgotten why. And as a panic TA, right, I go to our department library and I'm looking at every book and magazine article on the shelf about C++ to try and figure out like what's wrong here. And for those who know, right, what you need is a space. At that time, you need a space between the two, right? It's the maximum munch rule. Maximum munch rule is that it's going to tokenize that as a right shift operator. I gave the guy an A because like he found an actual problem, right? And there's it's value in finding problems. And I had been reminded like that night also, like I'd read a lot of Bjarne's stuff. And when I was at Bell Labs, they had a bunch of technical reports on C++. And I love the writing of those. Because he not only said, here's what I did, but here's why I did it, and here's the other options, and here's why I believe this one is better. And I thought that's a great way, to do things like language design and all sorts of things. And at that point, I'm realizing like I want to start coding in C++, really, like professionally. I'm with my next job. That's what I'm going to be looking for. Leave grad school, and eventually my fiance at the time, well, not my wife, finds an ad in the Chicago Tribune for a C++ engineer. Like for the youngsters in the crowd, right? Newspapers like are this paper thing, and like they print it, and you got to like put your resume in a letter in an envelope and a stamp and send it off. Like, that's the era. And I had been reading other ads, right? And a lot of ads would ask for C/C++ programmers. And I know what that meant. That meant you would be writing code in C. We just can't hire enough. And I really didn't want to do that. But this ad really intrigued me more because it really was a C++ shop. And WMS Gaming was a slot machine company. I would end up being there for 10 years. And it was all about C++. And they were running a full video slot machine on an 8188 with 640K of RAM, 64K of 64K of ROM, and 64K of battery-backed RAM. Right? And a sidebar, right? Some people think slot machines are easy, right? And the thing is, if it's got money on it and you pull the plug and put it back in, it can't have forgotten any of that. I mean, there are regulatory agencies looking at every line of code. We have to get things certified, especially like random number generators, and it's expensive to redo any of that stuff. So we need a good, lean, solid code for this. And that's why they were looking for good C++ people. And as engineers, like we knew we were pushing the boundaries of this little system. Like I'll give it, didn't have for this. There was a protocol, and like we'd moved from version 4 to version 5. And I actually made the code smaller. Like they come like, how much RAM is this? It's like, oh no, I gave you back like 1,000 bytes. Because I just like saw a switch statement that repeated the same code everywhere. It's like, just refactor that. And that stuff mattered. But we knew we were pushing the limits of this system. And we knew we were pushing the limits of like, our programming knowledge, because we're all roughly, like in our 20s, 30s, we're same age. And so whenever I would ask, if I want to go to training, I want to go to a seminar or a class on C++, right? My management always said yes. And my teachers, at that point then became, Scott Myers, Dan Sachs, Herb Sutter, Andre Andrescu, and Steve Dewars. Like, those were the people I was now getting to learn from. They also sent me to the first BoostCon. Sorry for the logo, I couldn't find the 2007 one. This is the first one was in 2007 in Aspen. And I met Beeman Dawes, the founder of Boost. And he was the first person who said, hey, Nevin, you should go to a standards meeting. There's going to be a local one coming up at Fermilab. You should go in 3 years. And I'm briefly thinking I can say, wait, I can go to a standards meeting. I don't have to wait 3 years. I have a job. I can fly somewhere. But I didn't think I was good enough or smart enough or expert enough to go. I didn't have the nerve. And so I would wait 3 years and see what happens then. Now, maybe I would have been a little less intimidated had I known the standards committee is ruled by the same people who are, create consistency in pipe threads or outlets or toilet paper. But I didn't know that. Dan Sachs, right, who was there in the beginning, right, shared a little bit of the history. I'm going to read this. History about how this group, built upon standardizing parts for factories, ended up ruling C and C++. During World War II, all manufacturers of tanks, ships, and planes needed to be in sync. So they came together to create a national standards body. In the 1970s, that evolved into the American National Standards Institute, ANSI, which developed formal rules for creating consensus in industry. In 1978, Jim Brody at Motorola was asked to write a reliable C compiler based on what had been published by Kernahan and Ritchie. Only the description of the language was too informal to be the basis for a reliable compiler. He poked around and found out that other people had the same problem. So he needed a national standard. Jim had the idea to reach out to ANSI. In 1983, following their checklist, he put a notice in the trade press inviting anyone who was interested to a convening meeting. That meeting led to the C Standards Committee. When C++ needed a standard, the C committee decided not to take it on. They declined. Right? It just wasn't what they did. It's not their area of expertise. So the process was repeated, and the first C++ Standards Committee meeting was born in a one-day organizational meeting in December of 1989. Now, I don't know, if that history would have mattered, right? But I didn't know any of that, right? To me, the committee is some, really smart, sharp people figuring this out, They're more brilliant than I am. They're high up on a mountain figuring this, how to make the language better for the rest of us. But the other part of me says, I wanted to learn more about C++. And I was running out of places to go. I'd been to Scott Myers, Herb's C++ seminars. There were no meetings, classes, or seminars, for advanced topics that I hadn't already taken. They just didn't exist. Right? So it was becoming my motivation to come to the meeting so that I could learn more C++. And now around this time, Scott Myers gives my name to a company called DRW, which is a low latency trading firm in downtown Chicago. And they're saying, they can't find good C++ people. Scott's like, can't find good, can I give them your name? Which is a huge ego boost to me, right? And I say, sure. And I pass the phone screen and they say, send us a resume and come in for an interview. And I go I don't have a resume because I wasn't looking. They said, come on anyway. Pass the interview, they want me to come back and meet a partner, and they hire me. And as part of that, right, they agreed to send me to the meeting later that year at Fermilab, which is, again, local Chicago. So now I have to figure out, well, how do I actually go attend the meeting, right? Well, I know Herb a little bit. I'll ask Herb. So I send Herb an email. He says, "Hi, Nevin. We welcome people to attend for a meeting or two as an observer. This lets you participate and argue and do most everything, except only you can't actually cast a vote. I'm CCing Steve Clamage, chair of the U.S. committee, who can provide more information about attending as an observer. Thanks, Herb." So really, I just needed an invitation and my national body to approve it. And those rules haven't really changed very much. It's about the same. If you want to join today, right, you do what how I started. And then there's Steve Clamage writes to me. And to me, the most important part of this is, the meeting might be boring. and for a couple of years, Herb would say the same thing of every meeting, like, we're just crossing the T's and dotting the I's, minutiae, it's not going to be very exciting. Every meeting has some excitement. We don't know where it's going to be. They've never, to this date, been boring. So this is like, we weren't great at pictures. My friend Rob Douglas took these pictures at the first meeting. And I show up first day, Bjarne is there. Herb Sutter is kind of there in spirit. I think he got sick and he couldn't make it, so we heard his voice over a raspy speaker in the conference room, kind of like the voice of God, which, seemed to work for me. And I'm watching, right? The committee is, getting into it, right? They're debating default, the rules for default for copy constructors and move constructors being defaulted, right? And it's a very heavy debate. And I come up with, I have some technical things I want to say, but again, I'm still scared. I'm terrified. Now, it turns out at this meeting, I have a friend of a friend who was a committee member. So I would send him an email, could you just bring up this point? And he would go, "Nevin, you should speak up." And for 5 days, I was doing this, right? I couldn't get the nerve to, speak up at that meeting during session. It wasn't going to happen. So I have to have some fun side, right? This is, the age of my kids around this time. So we came back to DRW and I asked, can we join the committee? And they agreed since it was only $2,000. It was good to be in finance. This would never have happened in, WMS gaming and slot machines. So then, I took the next step and I had DRW join Insights. I talked it over with the lawyers because we have to sign a legal agreement saying we're not going to give any of our secret sauce away. And this is the same group that sponsored me as a guest. But because we are now members, right? I am in the ISO Global Directory, which means I get a vote on this committee, right? I am a member. There's some weird rules, but there's really no magic to joining, right? You pay, you can join. Every country has different ways. If you want to go and you can't afford to, there are other ways to get in, through the C++ Foundation or through Boost. So we get to Madrid. There's John. And I'm impressed, right? I'd read his, large scale, C++ design, right? And what John is doing at that meeting is that he has a paper about wide contracts and no accept. And he's small enough at that point. He's going around to each individual, and with his charm and his logic and breadth, trying to convince you that he is correct. And I'm a member of this committee, right? So he comes to me and he, the whole spiel. And he convinces me he is correct, right? And I truly believe that until we actually get to the plenary debate on this very subject, a very heated plenary debate. So, I'm looking around and all of a sudden my brain goes, wait, there's a problem. This doesn't quite work. And, I'm looking around the room and nobody else is, coming up with this point. So it's I now have to speak, right? A heated plenary session, I have to speak. And so what it was is, if you violate a precondition, the standard says you now are hit undefined behavior. Standard also says that means the standard no longer applies. So even if you have a wide contract marked no accept, you can throw through a no accept clause because the standard no longer applies. There's a compiler expert just behind me who goes, no accept trumps undefined behavior. in some sense, I disagree with him. I mean, to this day, he is correct, in the practical world that we all live in. But in the theoretical world of the standard, right, I, to this day, do not believe he was correct. But that's okay. I was okay with, because the people in that room had listened to me and they understood what I said, right? They had thought about it. It wasn't just, playing lip service. And to me, that's enough. I make my point and I can say it, and that was fine. And I believe contracts in C++26 have actually finally addressed this. And I am a wholehearted, supporter of contracts in C++26. So, two other things happened at the Madrid meeting. I mean, the first was, even though I don't even know if John remembers, I was taking, I kind of blindsided him by switching positions. But, John and I became friends at that meeting. And eventually I would become friends with a lot of other committee members. And the other thing is, I got to vote on the first new standard for 13 years. And it was weird, right? It was Thursday, right? It was a 5-day meeting, and this is the 4th day. And we have a tenuous consensus, right? All the open issues we had left for C++11 had been resolved. So Herb, took what I thought was going to just be some quick poll. It turns out, no, that was actually the vote to say, kind of like in shock afterwards, I guess we just voted this in. Went for the picture and took the next day off. 1 day in 13 years seems okay. So a year goes by, right? And the next standard is starting to take shape, and I'm starting to find, my comfort and my role inside the committee at that point, right? It's taking shape too, right? I'm the guy who's I'm finding the small things that aren't quite right and trying to fit, ways to fix them. And, over the years, and this part's not quite chronological with the rest, there's a bunch of things, I take some credit for. The first thing I did, there was on the mailing list against the core language people, right? This is really not my expertise. I found out that bit fields that were marked INT could behave differently than bit fields that were marked SIGNED space INT. They'd heard this from C. And at one point, it was me against everyone in core, because they're going okay, we all agree we're not going to do anything with this, and it's I don't agree. This is still wrong. And then the whole room, they shifted over to my point of view. By the way, fun fact: I was just at the C meeting, and they're still debating this. I'm going to have to go do this again. But besides, another thing I did was string view of a null pointer value. Right, that's basically undefined behavior. That's not the same thing as an empty string. Right, I was fighting Google. We had a big, gigantic Thunderdome session to debate this in Rapperswil, Switzerland, and I successfully debated this. One of the things Matt had found, as I used to work with Matt Gobble at DRW, is that vector bool mplace back didn't exist. So I now had to go argue, I have to go to the committee, and nobody wants to deal with vector bool, but I have to go to the committee and argue that we need this for consistency. And then Alistair Meredith points out, yeah, and I don't know, should it be variadic? And he goes, yeah, because it could be 0 or 1 parameters and still have to do it. So again, it's still an improvement, right? It should be, even though vector bool isn't that consistent with the rest of vector, we should make it as consistent as possible. And another thing I did, for 23, there were kind of 2 proposals. One was to make the function call operator static, and the other was to make the square bracket operator variadic. But there was no proposal to do both. Each paper said, well, if we do the other one, we should make them do the same thing. We didn't. We forgot. It fell through the cracks, and it's okay, I'll kind of push this for C++26. And I was having dinner with the head of delegation for Canada, and he says, no, we should do this now. And Gasper Allman, had dinner with him later, and he said, no, we should do this now. Well, if you guys are also going to write national body comments, which is how we get things changed at the end, where we are now in the process, I'll write one too, and I'll push for this. And we fixed it for 23. And these were very satisfying wins, right? I'm making progress, right? I'm making things better. However, what I also remember are, the losses, right? They hurt, right? And And from some of those debates, there are still wounds. Those wounds lasted a very long time. And I'll tell you the story of the first big, thing that I lost for a couple of years. And so at the time, my main hangout was the newly formed Library Evolution Working Group. And they were debating a proposal called optional. Right? Optional is a type that adds one extra state. It's the kind of model like you may not have data yet. So you need it lexically. You need a variable for it, and you need to eventually fill it in or not. You need something less than the scope for a lifetime. I mean, it's a very important type. It was a very important type at DRW. It was an important type when I worked on slot machines. Heck, there are even songs written about optional. I can get you a YouTube link later. I'm not kidding. I found that out this week. So the debates for this started on the mailing list. And for instance, some people were uneasy about optional TREF because the assignment semantics are kind of surprising when you have a reference. And the authors, to their credit, said, okay, let's pull that now. We'll put it in later, because we want to gain consensus. We want to get optional into the standard. But that revision wouldn't be enough. Right? At the Bristol meeting in 2013, we tried to get through the one big issue was how should comparison operators work? And for regular types, normal things like integers, that's easy. For things that have weird rules, like floating point types, that's not. So one of the problems with floating point types is that they have a state called a nan, right? Not a number. So if you have two variables, both nans, they do not compare equal because nan is defined as doesn't match anything, including itself. And so, okay, if we add a state, are we still preserving equality and inequality and then relation operators? And more generally, what if we have other types that have weirder rules than that? How should this work? And we couldn't come to consensus. So on Tuesday evening of that meeting, starting at 7:30 p.m., we went into our LEWG room and argued until 1:15 in the morning. No breaks. Tempers were, very heated arguments. People just kept repeating themselves. Some people refused to answer questions. It was very, very frustrating. So by the end of that, we figured, okay, the only thing we can get into way to get this into C++ 14 is we will remove all the relation operators except for equality and less than. Not equals is gone, greater than is gone, all the rest. We will figure that out later. And that worked. In the full committee, we actually voted it into the C++ 14 working draft. And this is design freeze right after this. I didn't realize that wasn't the end of the story, and that wasn't going to go well. Because something happened that almost never does, is that at the very next meeting, which was the one DRW hosted in Chicago, we pulled optional out of the standard because of this issue. I mean, I was arguing to keep it in. I remember John arguing to keep it in. We couldn't persuade. And so they said, hey, let's put this in a technical specification. Or as I like to put it, purgatory for proposals. And the reason I call it purgatory, I mean, the practical reason is everybody, if you're doing production code, you know that it's an evolutionary dead end, right? Even if we put it in the standard, we're going to change it. And if the language evolves, we're going to change it. If it's in a technical specification, we're not going to touch it. So people don't adopt it into their code. They just don't. Which means we don't get the feedback in the committee that we are desperate to get because no one's using it. And really, it languished for 3 years in the library fundamentals technical specification. That was bad, right? It burned me out. It frustrated me, right? I had no fight left. And I just didn't have the energy, or didn't think I would have the energy. So about that time, Matt and I are working on variant. We had been using the variant in Boost, and it wasn't quite meeting our needs. So we figured, well, let's try to see if we can design and implement a better one. And we had. And we started going through the process of we can open source this. And we're going to standardize it. Our namespace was DTS, which is STD backwards, right? This was the intent. But Matt isn't on the committee. I am, and I don't have the energy. I can't do this now. I haven't recovered. I don't know if I ever can do this, right? So Funny thing happened. Axel Neumann from CERT, about a year later at the Urbana meeting, comes with a proposal for standard variant, which is pretty close to the one Matt and I had invented. It's like, great, we can finally get this. And then it's like, oh, but this paper isn't that good. He made some rookie mistakes, right? He didn't explain how he got to his design. He just said, this is what it should be. And like, you need to teach the committee. They're experts on C++, but they're not experts on the thing you care about. So you need to teach them. Okay, it's like, I know how to get this through, but there are going to be some pain points because I remember the part that, Matt and I like the hard design part, and like that, the committee's not going to go for that easily. So, but it actually helped knowing there was someone I had never worked with before, right? He came up with basically the same idea, the same design that Matt and I had come up with, right? That's kind of validation, right? I'm not in this alone, right? There'll be other people. So I started doing a lot of work, and I was willing to fight the battles in all but name only. Like Axel asked, like, if I want to be a co-author because I'm doing all this work, and I go, no, I do not want to be a co-author for the sole reason that if while we're debating it, right, I can't take it, I want to be able to leave the room. And if my name's on that paper, I can't leave the room because they stopped debating it. So, because again, the wounds from optional were still like, it still hurt. So the next meeting was in Lenexa, and there were like a group of 7 of us. We got together, we worked out the issues, we came to consensus. And now we need to figure out how do we convince the rest, both the rest of LEWG and eventually the rest of the committee of this. That was a whole nother matter. So I know it's a little bit technical stuff, right? So here's the issue, right? You have a variant that has an object of type A, and you want to put in an object of type B. So you destroy the object of type A, and while you're trying to create the object of type B, it throws. What state is the variant in? And that's like the fundamental issue. If you can say what that is, right, it dictates your design. The committee had dozens of ideas on what to do with this. There were over 400 email messages. And I probably wasn't working as hard on my actual job at the time, trying to like keep up and keep people focused on this one issue because it would go off on tangents everywhere. And I'm gnashing my teeth, right? I'm really scared I'm going to like crack a tooth because like I'm just getting very, frustrated. And while I didn't make it to this, I did listen in. Like in Kona, they had a gigantic evening session to basically debate this whole thing out. And it never really substantially changed from the original design. And 2 years later, in Finland, we got variant, but when variant was first proposed, it was targeting the library fundamentals technical specification. And we complete with one of the national bodies say, don't even think about putting this into the standard first, as a head of a national body. And just before this meeting, both optional got in and another sum type called NA, which can hold any copyable type. It comes from Boost originally. It's one of the earliest Boost types. I think Kevlin Henny did it initially. And those have gotten into the standard. And David Sangel made an impassioned plea that we should go directly to the standard. And they asked me, him and Matt Calabrese asked me ahead of time because I didn't know I wasn't going to be in Finland at that point. But like, if you can make it happen, go for it. Like, I totally agree that it really does belong in the standard. But we got it, right? We got it into C++ 17, all 3 sum types we wanted. Like, so the first time since the original C union, like C++ has like real sum types in it. Oh, and that other thing, optional TREF I told you about later. The talk in the slide top beforehand was by Steve Downey, who had just gotten it in as one of the last things we put into C++ 26. So we do eventually get to later. So in these events, they kind of solidified my next identity on the committee, right? I was like probably as stubborn as John, right? But pragmatic, I'm trying to be effective. And you kind of need all that for the next job I'd be given. It was going to be an incubator. We were getting too many papers, so we need to basically triage the papers and get them into good shape for the rest of the groups. And so, became the gatekeeper, right? Either we accept proposals to move forward, or we say, no, here's what you need to improve your paper, so we can do that. And this is the San Diego meeting, and we set up 2 incubators, one for the language side, one for the library side. And I helped I spent all my time, I was asked when I spent all my time in the library incubator at that meeting, helped shape, what we would be doing. And eventually I was asked to co-chair that, and that's where I am now. And it was nice to feel, appreciative, right? People want you to do more, right? That's a great thing. And the other thing that happened was fellow committee members, Daisy Holman, who gave a keynote, and Hal Finkel, who's right over there. They pulled me into where they were working in the National Lab System, and they got me, Hal hired me and got me a job at Argonne National Labs, right? Because, they saw I had more to offer than just being a committee member, right? Smart figures things out, this is good. So now, I'm working on supercomputers, right? This is a big leap from slot machines. So at Argonne, I work on a library called Kokkos, and this is dedicated to performance portability, right? And so what we need is, and it's pretty popular inside the national labs, and it's starting to get more popular around the world. And what we need is, right, every couple of years there's a new supercomputer with a new architecture. Scientists need to be able to port their code to the new supercomputer, but even more important, and easily, but more important than that, they need similar kind of performance. If they have bad performance goes to hell. It's just it doesn't work. So that's what, that's one of the things I work on. And because of my committee work, I make sure our needs in that community are met by this committee. I won't go into the detail, trivially copyable. I did not understand why that was important until I got here. Now I understand. That's how you transfer things between a GPU and CPU. And I would, explain this to members of the committee, and I still do that. Right? And I also work on a thing called SYCL, which is another performance portability layer. I work on standardizing that, and very recently, as of 3 weeks ago, I am on the C committee helping to standardize that too, because we have interest in all that. So I hope my story convinced some of you that you can join the committee too. And you should, really. And not just for what you know, but for what you're willing to learn. I get a lot out of this. And I learn how to argue with, people. I learn technical stuff, right? And you could have been in the room with us. This isn't Sophia. This is Herb Sutter counting the votes for reflection. And I'm very excited about C++ 26, right? Besides reflection, right? We have contracts and erroneous behavior and hardening to help address safety concerns. And on the library side, I work, I'm one of the co-authors for linear algebra and for in-place vector, and I helped Shepard get those in. And we have standard execution, and we have SIMD. This is an exciting, good, nice release, right? And again, our committee is 540 people, about 200 of which show up at a meeting, right? There's millions of developers we're affecting, billions of people, right? iPhone has C++ code on it, Android does too, right? And there's 200 of us voting from 25 countries, making the difference, making the world a better place. And you can still show up, right? There's a meeting in London in March where we're going to be signing off on C++ 26. You can get in the picture like I did. Now, Herb might tell you it's going to be a boring meeting. We're crossing, Herb is brilliant. Don't get me wrong, and we really, the C++ community really does owe him a debt of gratitude for his enthusiasm and technical ingenuity for the last 23 years as convener. He's stepping down. Guy Davison is stepping up, and I believe he will also be a great convener for us. But if Herb tells you it's going to be a boring meeting, don't believe him. If that's not enough to convince you, our next meeting's in Hawaii. Kona, Hawaii. Come to Hawaii. Right? And again, you can come with a proposal. If that's what you need to get your company to send you, do it. We as chairs will prioritize your paper because we know that's what it takes to get you, the funds to come to a meeting. And you'll have time to nurture and research your ideas and learn from the people around you. You will learn a ton. And you can drill down into whatever really interests you. It's very much like the hallway track here at CppCon, right? It's the hallway track on steroids. And I didn't look closely at this shirt. But that's another story too. And I really do want to give a special thanks to the committee, right? I don't want this to sound like I am holding up the committee. That's not it, right? Right? All these people, right? They have stories, right? Some are in some ways like mine, in other ways they're totally different, right? And in some sense, we're all just cause, right? If I were to leave, I'm pretty sure C++ would go on without me. But together, we're all making a real difference, a real positive difference. And there's a lot of individual effort, but really, it's the collective group effort that makes the improvements of C++ happen. Someone took like a live photo on an iPhone, so that's why we have yay. I do want to give a special thanks to Sherry. She's literally spent, if you count the hours, like days of her time, helping me make this, the best talk it can be, and helping me hopefully convince you, come to standards meetings, please. And Sherry, since you haven't seen the next slide, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Have I convinced you to come to a standards meeting?
Can you use your journals?
Yes, we can use. No, you can tell us if what we're writing makes sense. I mean, it's. Anyway, thank you very much. We can go back to the Bjarne shirt.
I was going to ask this. That's my question. You were taking questions.
Yes, I am taking questions.
What's the story about the shirt then? I want to know.
Okay, so because there's a CppCon connection to this. So we were emerging from the pandemic, right? So you saw the chef's hat, right? I have goofy things made. I'm going to get a Hawaiian shirt with Bjarne's picture on it for the Hawaii meeting. And so I take 150 pictures of Bjarne giving the keynote here. So I have a really creepy photo roll of Bjarne, right? I don't use any of them because none of them are actually really good. So I find 2 older pictures I have of him. And then he can't make it to that first meeting. So another year before he gets to see it. And so for this actual picture with Bjarne, I think this was in Varna, he said, normally, people come and, want a picture with me, but I want a picture with you.
So how did you get a chef's hat? What was that?
So we were. I mean, I've known John Kalb for many years, right? And I was helping to plan with him, and a bunch of others plan the first BooSCon, right? Or CppCon, right? And it's I think we should do grilling the committee, right? This is what became the fireside chat, and it's probably better as a fireside chat. It's not confrontational. But I said, we should grill the committee, and it's I'll get a chef's hat made, if we do. Where's the logo, right? He sends me, tells me the person who has it, he sends the logo. And I find a company, and it's I give myself okay, a $100 budget, right? And the chef's hat was $25, so I had an apron made too. And this is back when it was in Washington State, so they were supposed to ship it there, or ship it to me, and they said they could get it to me just before I was leaving. And it was a company out of Portland, Oregon. And they shipped it to Chicago, and it's no, I just left. I told you when I was leaving. I told you Friday night, I'm out of here. So they paid, I think, $90 to FedEx it from Chicago so that I could have it for the grill the committee session at the first CppCon.
How were you fortunate enough to end up working with Matt Godbolt on Variant?
I don't know who initially recruited you. I know. I interviewed you, and it was one of the enthusiastic people saying yeah, we need to hire him. Let's just do it. Because Matt is one of the most enthusiastic people I've ever met, and he's really smart. I mean, this is someone I wanted to work with. Is really what it is. and I'm glad I had an opportunity. And maybe in the future we'll have an opportunity to do things together too. And our birthdays are 4 days apart. I have fun facts everywhere.
Thank you. This has been a good talk, and it has been pushing my thoughts about the committee of which I am not a member. And I have a question because deep inside I am perhaps very scared of the future in many ways. And with Google and Apple decreasing the investment in C++, Bloomberg being very invested in the language and the ecosystem for now, switching to more and more Python in the stack. I'm afraid that in a maybe not too far future, C++ would be the new COBOL, meaning a lot of old men maintaining old code that needs to be maintained because for some reason or another, the world has moved along, and I would be very sad if that happens. But what are your thoughts on this? Because the answer to that question will also affect me. So,
Yes.
so how do you see this?
So over the years, like I had the same thoughts at times. Like before joining the committee, like I didn't see C++ going anywhere because the committee wasn't producing anything. They couldn't get concepts. It's like maybe I should switch to Java. I don't know. Like what do I need? Career-wise. Or another thing, like at the first BoostCon, like I am walking with Sean Parent and I think John Calb and a few others. We're walking to lunch in Aspen, and Sean's going, C++ will collapse under its own weight. This was 2007, right? It still hasn't collapsed. I mean, we have a lot of challenges. Don't get me wrong, right? Certainly safety and security are very big issues, and I personally believe not only things like profiles, but we need detection mechanisms like Sean Baxter's Circle stuff or something inspired by Rust. We need both those things to move forward. But we've been good about meeting those challenges as time goes on. So I don't, I wouldn't, I'm certainly not, not writing it off yet. But there are definite challenges. And yeah, it's hard when big companies stop giving, as many engineers. But for instance, the hardening stuff came from LEWGI from Apple, right? So they're still really contributing. Our project editor is Thomas Koppe from Google. So there's still people contributing from those companies.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I'm find myself attending a lot of these things about how the committee works and stuff. This is a purely practical question. I mean, you're serving on the committee is not a paid position or anything. So
No.
like when you have to go to Hawaii or Munich or all these places, are you paying that out of? I mean, how does that work? Is a company company working for you helping comp that?
So
Like, how's
for
that work?
my current company, that's a great question because
Yeah.
right, and my current company, like it's kind of part of the mission of the national labs is to make the world smarter. Like I am in the leadership computing facility, right? We are trying to lead the world in software development, and so this is kind of part of our mission, like to give talk. Like when I started there, like they go, okay, yeah, Nevin, you'll be going to like 3 committee meetings a year, and I knew that, and they go, oh, we should join the SYCL committee, and like you should go to those meetings, and those had 3 meetings a year, and then like, oh yeah, you should give talks at conferences, and it's like my kids were only seniors in high school. That was like, wait, this is starting to add up in terms of travel. Like it's 1 year early on me, but in other jobs, right, it's a harder sell, right, because the time frames are not instant, right? They're years away that you get the benefit. I mean, at DRW, I nominally said it was for recruiting, and I'm sure our boss, right, Derek, is like kind of went along with that, right? But and a lot of it is if you're a good engineer, right, your company wants to keep you happy, and they will send you because that's part of what keeps you happy, right? I mean, to me, I think a great way to manage people is figure out what motivates them and give if you can, indulge what motivates them.
Well, thank you.
Actually, I just want to add a thought. When we were talking, you also made the really important point that self-interest in the
Yes.
committee room is valuable. Can you explain
Yes.
that?
Yeah, it's okay to come to a meeting and have here's what I want for selfish reasons because we don't know your point of view. That's the huge. I've been in, and I can't think of any examples offhand, but we've been in committee meetings where someone just asks a question like I don't understand something or how can this work or I don't think this is quite right, and you see the entire room switch its position, including the author. Like, oh, I hadn't thought about that, and even just saying like I don't understand something because. Half the people in that room also don't, but they're too afraid to speak up, right? We're kind of all afraid of being judged, and we really don't judge you on the committee, right? We may judge your idea, but it's not a personal judgment.
Also, what industries need?
What?
What different industries need?
Yeah, I started coming because like users were not represented on the committee, right? Compiler vendors were, library writers were, right? I was just representing users, whatever user base for whatever company I was working at. And we need a lot more of that.
hi for me. Okay. Hi, I have kind of two questions that
Sure.
are kind of interdependent and kind of similar. So I'm somebody who's like very early of their career. I started my career like 2 months ago. I started getting interested in how the standardization works. I was in college, and it requires like you have to, if you want to be in the committee, you need to show up like twice, no more than twice, like 3-4 times a year for a week, and
Yes.
it's expensive even if you're joining as a guest, because if you want to actually talk to people, you probably want to be in the actual office. Do you think a great way to ease somebody into the standardization process if they cannot have this time commitment and resource commitment?
First of all, see if you can come once, right? You can, right? The committee is we're not allowed to charge money to actually attend a meeting. And there are free ways besides just being a guest of the convener, right? You can go, the C++ Foundation will add you as an alternate. Boost may add you as an alternate. Come once, make connections, right? We're human beings. We're social creatures. We need to make connections, right? This was kind of the worst part of the pandemic. Like, we actually got a lot of work done during the pandemic too, but only because we had these personal relations with each other for a couple of years. And you could tell near the end of the pandemic, we were getting more snarky with each other because we had forgotten that. And if you're doing this, you can attend virtually. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, right? Hawaii's 3 time zones from here. It's 4 time zones from Chicago, right? If Europe, right, it takes them 24 hours to get there, and it's half a day. Right? I'm not saying that's easy. It's not. There are times I couldn't make it to the meeting, and I've had to roughly stay up all night so I could pay attention.
And I think these two questions chain together quite well.
Sure.
And as students, or I was a student 9 months ago, early career person, I'm really interested in some of the design decisions and why choices are made and how they're made. Is there an easy way, any good way for me to access these discussions outside of seeing the vote? To understand why design choices are made? Do you have any books to recommend? Yeah.
I mean, the early decisions, Bjarne Strostrup's Design and Evolution of C++ so the committee notes are not public. And the reason they're not public is because we want to allow the free exchange of ideas. And if people think they could be called out to their company or something else, it wouldn't be fair. So if you were a committee member, you would have access, and then you can do all the archaeology you want. But there's really no way, if you're not a committee member, to be able to do that, other than talk to other committee members. But in the hallway conversations at standards meetings, I find out why is standard deck in there, right? Because the story I heard is the reason deck is in there is because Stepanov came and they started nitpicking him, so he came up with a data structure that they would all nitpick and they would give him everything else, and it turns out they gave him everything. So
I guess this is
that's the story I heard, right?
I know everybody have their trip reports, but I guess this is my suggestion to the committee
and it's hard to game the committee, by the way. It really is. Although Matt and I successfully did it with Clump. I still have to keep going with that, but I wanted small vector, and I wanted to think of a name so bad that they would give us small vector. And then 2 days later, you and I were just brainstorming. He comes up with Clump. So.
Devin will give you more time later because he's the greatest guy ever. I want to get a chance for John to ask this
but I don't think my questions is answered.
So you without being a committee member, you really can't get to that information.
Can you take this question as a suggestion to the committee then?
We don't know how to do it. Again, we're all volunteers, right? No one has the time to write that.
All right.
Right? Because we would have to filter it and either filter out all the names or get permission from all the names on those discussions to say what, associate what they said with, we make public whatever we can. Our poll numbers are public, right? They're available except during the actual meeting, they're available on GitHub.
All right.
But I wish we could do better. I mean, we want to be open.
You can come to the meeting.
Hi, sir.
Hello, Nevin.
First time on the microphone?
Yeah, it's a little tall. I think people favor the taller people. I'm kind of a little short. I have a terrible chest coat, so excuse me. First of all, I just want to say you're up against Andrei Alexandrescu.
I know.
Together, we came up with the idea of engage, entertain, and educate. I am thoroughly impressed with your person.
Thank you.
That's why you're a good friend of mine. your presentation skills are amazing, and Sherry's fingerprints are all over you. So you're going to have to go take a shower. Anyway, but I did want to say this. Someone got up and said that they're concerned for C++, so I'm going to shamelessly make an advertisement.
Go for
Giving a
it.
talk tomorrow at 9 o'clock, and I'm going to be talking about what C++ needs to be safe. And by that, I mean safe to use and also safe from rust. And and seriously, the slides have been refined quite a bit. And even though I'm a little under the weather, I really wanted to be, because I saw your talk, I wanted to be more like your talk, which is engaging and entertaining, and less
Oh, you
about
are.
education.
Dinosaur P, come on.
I know. That was exceptional. I learned a lot about that, trust me. But no, seriously, because I would like that talk to have more of this flavor and less of my typical, oh, you must learn this now. Because there's an overarching thing is that if we work together, we have Bloomberg, we have Citadel, we have Tanium, and we have the C++ Alliance, are now all working together to produce something that will hopefully, our goal is to eliminate UB by 2032. And that's a goal. I didn't say I could do it, but we have a plan. So if you're interested, and by the way, I don't mean using compile time exclusivity, because that wouldn't help Citadel or Bloomberg with our gazillion lines of existing code. So if you're interested in what we have and where we're going, come to the talk. It's refined. And thank you again for this talk.
He may underestimate, but he is a really good speaker.
Okay, well, you're never mind me. I'm going to need to get some coaching from Sherry on the next one. But this talk, his little room, is a gem. And I strongly recommend that everybody in the room tell a few friends to watch this talk because it's priceless. Thank you.
Thank you.
Always hard to follow up after.
That I know.
Sometimes it's hard to follow up after, during John Lakos, but also after. Okay, so I'm going to ask about something you briefly mentioned just before. So to what extent do you think we are currently managing to cater after the needs of the masses, not just the experts?
I think we try very hard, right? The masses, will say, like, I'm stuck on something, right? And they'll come up with an idea, but we have to be the deep thinkers to see, does that actually work? Does that actually fit in with the rest of C++? And those are not shallow conversations. Those are deep. They're very hard. Those cause a lot of debate. But, that really is our job. We need to hear from those users. We need to find out, what are their problems, right? And they may come up with a solution, but we need to, really think about, like, is this a solution to their problem? Is it going to cause more problems, right? Those are hard trade-offs, right? I don't, like, when I look at proposals, right, I don't see, like, I'm right and, you're wrong. It's like, no. We see the world differently because we've had different experiences. So you and I are going to make very different trade-offs based on that. And, like, you'll see, I mean, sometimes on the committee, like, certain, a company will be accused of, like, you're just trying to bias things. Like, this has happened to, to Microsoft and to Google. And if you watch the people in the room, they are not all voting the same way, right? It's just they see the same kinds of problems. So most of them are kind of voting the same way because of that, not because they're trying to bias the vote. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's, again, we desperately need more users. We need the input. But we need to, we need to do the analyzer as the deep thinkers.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great talk.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed learning about your experience. I was curious how the different working groups in the standard committee work. And
how does which work?
The different working groups.
Okay.
And
So
how they evolved over time, I guess.
So on Monday morning, we have a big plenary session, and the convener kind of sets, like, here's what we're going to do for the week. And then we split up into a bunch of different, so usually at least 5 parallel sessions, right? There's the evolution group, which is brand new proposals, the library evolution group, which is brand new library proposals, evolutions for language. Then we have the core working group, which is, I don't want to say they're the wording group because they're really checking it over, right? Does this fit in the language? Are there issues we missed? And the library working group does the same kind of thing. And they will push, if we're missing things like, did you guys discuss this? If the answer is no, they push back and we have to go discuss it. And then there's a bunch of little study groups. The biggest one is concurrency and parallelism. Until recently, they used to also meet for 5 days. And there's one for contracts. There's one, the two incubators are study groups. There's one for numerics. And we'll bounce proposals back and forth, like saying, numerics needs to look at this, or Unicode needs to look at this. Like, that's just typical, that's normal. And eventually it goes to the working, the library evolution working group or the evolution working group, or both. Some papers cover both. And if those get approval, it goes to library working group or the core working group, and they figure out the wording, they figure out, is it all together? And they're the ones who put up the motions that we actually, as an entire committee, vote on. And if if it gets consensus, it gets put in the standard. And so if you come to a meeting, and every room has a different flavor. Like my real happy place is the library working group. Jeff Garland is one of the chairs there, and it really is, right? It's a really friendly, relaxing place. The evolution groups tend to have more friction because it's not a harder job, but it's, you're really debating things instead of almost at consensus. And so if you ever do get to, please do come and visit every room.
Thank you.
Especially since you're at Argonne.
Yeah, we can talk to Mike and get him to send you.
So on the topic of C++ collapsing under its own weight, it is got to be, by and large, the most complicated language in existence. And I do static analysis, and I am currently working on implementing the rules for when a implicit copy constructor should exist or not. Every complicated aspect of the spec refers to some other complicated aspect of the spec. I'm curious, when we maintain large applications, it's very challenging to delete old code. And you started off with the example of how difficult it was just to change the scope of integer or the declarator of a for loop. So I'm curious your perspective as a committee member of what C++'s future is in terms of continuing to do breaking changes. Actually, default constructors are also on the list there, right?
I mean, that it's hard, right? We don't want to break users, right? Library vendors are not hostile. The committee's not hostile. We don't deliberately want to break users. But my personal thing is we have to figure out ways forward, and that may involve some breakage. I mean, even C++11 and move semantics, it broke some really uncommon cases in vector. Vector initially, the only way in 98 to put things in a vector was to copy them in, right? That got relaxed. You could move things in, or you can just create it in place. It turns out that's actually a detectable breaking silent change, but the code would be really weird. But if you have a shared pointer, right? If you copy it, you just get more of the reference count. But if you're just initializing one, you don't, right? And early on in my committee career, I brought up we can't just keep adding to the language, and I was flamed alive, right? But we don't know how to do it because everyone says, you should cut the extra stuff. I mean, not the stuff I'm dependent on, obviously. And this is a common refrain in our committee, we should have less proposals. Say no to more proposals. Not my proposals, obviously, but and we don't know how to do that and scale, and we don't want to break people. And the even more stringent requirements than us is C. So, we are willing to do it, but the bar is pretty high still, and I think it has to be because that's part of why C++ and C are successful languages. But it's a hard, challenging problem. Hi, Jeff.
How's it going? Great talk. Interesting stuff.
By the way, I wasn't buttering you up about LWG. It really is my happy place.
Thanks. No, we try to have a chill room. I did want to make one tiny correction. The C++ Foundation right at the moment is not accepting new people. The Boost Foundation is, but we are changing our name to the C++ Collective. So, but if you do want to participate, please find me, and I can help you. So we have about 25 alternates right now. But if you're interested in doing that, definitely.
Yeah, he's been leading the charge for that for years now.
Yeah,
and we really don't, we really don't want money to be the reason you can't come, especially for things like the actual fee to join Insights.
Yeah, and especially from the point of view of there are a lot of things you can do remotely now, which is different than it used to be 4 or 5 years ago. And I guess the last thing I would mention there is thank you very much for the time we've spent together personally.
Yeah.
It's been
and I've made friends with you too. Yeah. Thank you very much.